Step away from the house. Now. The command cut through the quiet like a line drawn in concrete, and Jamal Carter froze halfway down the front steps, one sneaker still on the cracked wood, his breath caught somewhere between confusion and fear, the early morning air cool against his skin at barely 50 degrees, and all he could see were uniforms, rows of them, green and tin stretching across his small front yard, boots pressing into the patchy grass his mom tried to keep alive every summer, neighbors already gathering behind. Chain-link fences, phones raised, whispers spreading like smoke, because nothing like this ever happened on their block, not for a kid like Jamal, not for a 17-year-old who spent most of his afternoons bagging groceries for $11.25 an hour and coming home with tired hands and quiet eyes. But the soldiers didn't move like this was a mistake. They moved like they were looking for something or someone. And Jamal's mind raced back, not to anything he'd done wrong, but to something small. Something no one ever noticed, 7 nights ago behind a gas station 3 blocks away, where the smell of spilled soda and gasoline hung thick in the air and a flickering overhead light buzzed like it was about to give out. That's where he saw her for the first time, an old woman wrapped in layers that didn't match the season, sitting on the curb with her hands tucked in her sleeves like she was trying to disappear, and Jamal had paused, just for a second, his plastic bag of leftover food, warm in his hand, the same leftovers he usually saved for himself, and he remembered thinking how easy it would be to just walk past, like everyone else did, like the cars that slowed but never stopped, like the people who looked but didn't see. But something in the way she held herself, not begging, not asking, just existing, made him step closer, and when he held out the bag, she didn't reach for it right away. She just looked at him, her eyes steady, almost searching, like she was trying to recognize something long gone. And then finally, slowly, she took it, nodding once, no words, just that small motion, and Jamal nodded back, awkward, unsure, before turning away, thinking that was it, just a small moment that didn't matter. But the next night, he came back, and she was there again, same spot, same silence, and he brought food again, and then again the night after that, until it became routine. Something quiet and steady in a world that never slowed down for him. Something no one understood, especially not the guys at work who laughed when they found out, calling him soft, saying he was wasting what little he had. But Jamal never argued. He just kept showing up, because every time he did, she looked at him the same way, like he mattered, like she was remembering something through him. And now, standing there with 50 Marines surrounding his house, their presence heavy and unreal, Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, all of this had started with her. The colonel did not raise his voice, but everything around him seemed to lower instead, like the air itself knew who was in charge, and Jamal felt it in the way the neighbors stopped whispering, in the way even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into the background. The man stepping forward with a calm that did not need to prove anything, his uniform pressed sharp, boots clean despite the gravel. His eyes fixed on Jamal like he had been looking for him longer than this moment, longer than this street. And for a second Jamal wondered if he was about to be blamed for something he did not understand, something bigger than him. But the colonel's next words did not sound like accusation. They sounded like something heavier, something closer to relief held too tightly for too long. Son, he said, steady, measured. I need you to think carefully. And Jamal swallowed, his throat dry, nodding even though his mind was already racing, because all he could think about was her, the old woman behind the gas station, the way she always sat slightly turned away from the road like she did not want to be seen, but still wanted to see everything, the way her hands trembled just enough to notice when she reached for the food, and the way she never asked for anything more, never told him her name, never explained why she was there, just those quiet moments under the buzzing light, night after night, until it started to feel like a conversation without words. And now this man in front of him was looking at him like those small moments mattered, like they had weight, like they had led directly here. Where did you meet her? The colonel asked, and Jamal blinked, the question landing harder than he expected, because it confirmed it. This was about her, not about anything else, not about trouble, not about something he had done wrong, but about something he had done without thinking it would ever matter. And Jamal glanced past the line of soldiers, catching a glimpse of his mother standing in the doorway behind him, her hand pressed against her chest, eyes wide, trying to understand what her son had stepped into. And he felt that pull again, that instinct to protect, to explain, but the words came out slower than his thoughts, careful, uncertain. Behind the gas station on Miller Street, he said, his voice steady but quiet. I just brought her food. And there was a pause, not awkward, not tense, just full, like something unseen had shifted into place. And the colonel's expression changed just slightly, not softer, but clearer, like a puzzle piece had finally clicked where it belonged. And behind him one of the Marines adjusted his stance, not out of impatience, but out of something like anticipation, and Jamal felt it again, that strange sense that this was not the beginning of something, but the middle of it, like he had stepped into a story already in motion, and he did not know how far it went or how deep it ran, only that it had started with something as simple as a paper bag of food and a quiet nod, under a flickering light, and now it stood here in front of him, in uniform, asking questions that felt too big for a kid who had only ever tried to do something small and right. The colonel did not look surprised, not even a little, as if Miller Street had already been written somewhere in a report long before Jamal ever said it out loud. And that realization sent a quiet chill through Jamal's chest, because it meant this was bigger than a coincidence, bigger than a few meals shared under a broken light. And the man gave a small nod, almost to himself, before turning slightly toward the line of Marines behind him, not issuing an order, just a glance, and somehow that was enough, their posture shifting in unison like they had all been, waiting for that one confirmation. And when he faced Jamal again, there was something different in his eyes now, something less distant, more personal. How long have you been bringing her food? He asked, and Jamal thought about it, counting backward through days that had started to blur together, school, work, home. Then that quiet stop behind the gas station, the routine that had never felt important until this exact moment. About 10 days, he said, his voice steadier now, because the fear was slowly being replaced by something else, something like confusion mixed with a growing sense that he had stepped into a story that did not belong to him. And the colonel exhaled slowly, not tired, but waited, like those 10 days had stretched into something far longer on his end, and for a brief second, his composure slipped just enough to reveal it, the strain of waiting, of searching, of not knowing, before he pulled it back into place. Did she ever tell you her name? And Jamal shook his head, remembering the way she avoided questions, how she would shift her gaze instead of answering, like words were something she no longer trusted. No, sir, he replied. She did not say much, and there was another pause, quieter this time, heavier, and Jamal noticed the way the colonel's hand tightened slightly at his side, not in anger, not in frustration, but in something closer to restraint, like he was holding back more than just questions. And then, carefully, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, holding it between his fingers before extending it toward Jamal, a photograph, worn at the edges, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times, and Jamal hesitated for just a fraction of a second before taking it, the paper cool against his skin, and when he looked down, his breath caught again, because even though the face in the picture was cleaner, younger, framed by a different kind of light, it was unmistakably her, the same eyes, the same quiet strength behind them, just without the layers of time and hardship that had settled over her now. And Jamal's grip tightened slightly as he looked back up, his voice lower, almost certain, that is her. And for the first time since he had stepped onto that porch, the colonel's shoulders shifted in a way that no rank could hide, just a fraction, just enough to show that something inside him had finally moved, something that had been locked in place until this exact confirmation. And he nodded once, slow, deliberate, like he was grounding himself in the reality of it, before speaking again, his voice no longer just official, but personal, steady but carrying something deeper beneath it. Her name is Eleanor Hayes, he said, and the name seemed to settle into the space between them, filling it with a meaning Jamal could feel but not yet fully understand. And the colonel continued, quieter now. She is my mother. The words did not echo, but they stayed, heavy and still, settling into Jamal's chest like something he could not just shake off. And for a moment he did not know where to look, at the photograph in his hand, at the colonel standing in front of him, or at the line of Marines who now felt less like a threat and more like witnesses to something he had never meant to start. And his mind went back again replaying every small detail he had ignored before, the way she held that worn chain in her fingers like it meant something, the way her posture changed slightly when certain cars passed, like she was remembering a life that no longer existed, and suddenly none of it felt random anymore. None of it felt small, and Jamal swallowed, his voice quieter now, more careful. She never said anything about family. And the colonel gave a slow nod, not surprised, just confirming something he already knew, and when he spoke again, there was no distance left in his tone, just a controlled weight. She would not, he said, and he took a step closer, not enough to invade space, but enough to lower the distance between rank and reality. She has been missing for 3 years, and the number landed harder than anything else had so far, because 3 years was not a mistake. It was not something that just happened. It was time, real time, seasons changing, people moving on, and Jamal felt something shift inside him, a quiet realization that the 10 days he had spent bringing her food were not just 10 days. They were the end of something much longer, something broken that had finally crossed his path without him knowing it, and behind the colonel, one of the Marines adjusted his cap slightly, not out of impatience, but like someone grounding himself in a moment that mattered more than routine, and Jamal glanced down at the photograph again, seeing it differently now, not just a face, but a person who had been searched for, remembered, missed, and the colonel continued, his voice steady but carrying something deeper now, something close to gratitude held tightly behind discipline. We searched shelters, hospitals, records, every place we could think of, he said, but she never stayed anywhere long enough to be found. And Jamal thought about that, about the way she always seemed ready to leave, the way she never brought more than she could carry, like staying in one place was something she no longer trusted. And it made sense now in a way it had not before, and he looked back up, his voice uncertain but honest. She was there every night, until yesterday, and the colonel's eyes sharpened slightly at that, not alarmed, but focused, like every word now mattered in a different way. Yesterday, he repeated, and Jamal nodded, the memory still clear, the empty curb, the flickering light buzzing with no one beneath it, the paper bag still warm in his hands with nowhere to go. She did not show up, he said, and for the first time, the silence that followed was not just heavy, it was charged, like something had shifted again, something unseen but understood by everyone standing there, and the colonel exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering for just a second before lifting again, steadier, resolved. And when he spoke next, it was not just a question, it was a step forward into whatever came next. Then you might be the last person who saw her before everything changed. The sentence did not feel like a question, it felt like a weight being placed directly into Jamal's hands. And for a second he did not respond, not because he did not want to, but because he was replaying that last night again, slower this time, more carefully, noticing the parts he had missed before, the way the air had felt colder than usual, dipping just below 45 degrees, the way the gas station light flickered longer before stabilizing, and most of all, the way she had looked at him. Differently, not just quiet, but distant, like she was already somewhere else, and Jamal rubbed his thumb lightly against the edge of the photograph still in his hand, grounding himself, then nodded slowly. Yes, sir, he said, his voice steady but lower now. I think I am. And the colonel studied him for a moment, not judging, not rushing, just listening in a way that made Jamal feel like every detail mattered, and that feeling pushed him forward, made him speak again, more certain this time. She was there like always, same spot, same time, he continued, his eyes drifting slightly as he pictured it. But she did not eat right away, and that small detail seemed to land differently than everything else, because the colonel's expression shifted just enough to show he understood the difference, and Jamal went on. She kept holding that chain, the one she always had, but tighter, like she did not want to let it go, and he paused, thinking, sorting through memory instead of guessing. And she asked me something, he added, and that made the colonel lean in just slightly, not physically, but in attention, like the space between them had narrowed even more. She asked if I believed people could come back after being gone a long time, and the words felt strange even now, like they had not belonged in that moment until now, until everything around him had changed, and Jamal let out a quiet breath. I told her yes, he said simply, because it had felt like the right answer then, even without understanding why. and for a second, nothing moved. Not the Marines, not the neighbors, not even the faint wind brushing through the street. And the colonel closed his eyes briefly, not long enough to draw attention. Just a moment, like he was holding on to that answer, measuring it against something only he knew. And when he opened them again, there was something different there, something steadier, more resolved. That sounds like her, he said quietly, and Jamal felt that again. That shift, like each small piece he offered was building something larger, something real. And he continued. She also said, "Thank you." And this time the words felt heavier, because she had never said that before, not in all the nights he had been there, just a nod, just silence. But that night had been different, and Jamal realized it now, standing here, that it had not been routine for her. It had been a goodbye, and the colonel's hand tightened again, just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice. But Jamal saw it, and understood it without needing it explained. And then the colonel asked one more thing, his voice calm, but carrying a quiet urgency beneath it. "Did she say where she was going?" And Jamal shook his head slowly, the memory clear, but incomplete. "No, sir," he replied. "But she stood up before I left." And that alone felt important, because she had never done that before, not once. And Jamal looked up, meeting the colonel's eyes directly now. And she was looking down the street, like she was waiting for something to come back for her. That detail did not pass quietly. It settled into the space like a signal finally understood, and the colonel turned his head slightly, not toward Jamal, but toward the street itself, his eyes scanning the direction Jamal had described, as if he could still see her standing there, waiting. And for a moment everything slowed again, the kind of stillness that does not come from silence, but from focus. And one of the Marines near the edge of the yard shifted his stance, glancing down the same stretch of road, following the invisible line Jamal had just drawn with his words. And the colonel spoke again, softer now, almost to himself. "She always waited facing east," he said, and Jamal frowned slightly, not confused, but trying to understand. And the colonel continued, "That is where our old house used to be, before we moved." And something about that landed differently, like the direction itself had meaning, like even after everything, she had still been oriented toward something that no longer physically existed but had never really left her. And Jamal felt a quiet pressure in his chest, the realization that what he had seen as random behavior had been something deeply rooted, something personal, and he nodded slowly. "That is the way she was looking," he confirmed, and the colonel exhaled through his nose, steady, controlled. But there was a shift now, not uncertainty, but direction. And he turned slightly toward one of the Marines behind him, a brief exchange of eye contact that carried more than words, and the Marine gave a small nod in return, stepping back just enough to speak quietly into a radio clipped at his shoulder, his voice low, measured, relaying something that Jamal could not fully hear, but could feel was connected directly to everything happening around him. And Jamal stood there, still holding the photograph, the edges now slightly warmer from his grip, his mind moving between past and present, between the quiet nights behind the gas station and this moment that felt too large to fully grasp. And then the colonel faced him again, closer now in presence, not in distance, his voice firm but no longer distant. "You did more than you realize," he said. And Jamal blinked, the statement catching him off guard, because to him it had never been more than a habit, a choice made each night without expectation. And he shook his head slightly, almost instinctively. "I just brought her food," he replied, honest, simple, and the colonel's expression did not change much. But there was something in his eyes now, something unmistakable, respect without exaggeration, recognition without spectacle. "No," he said quietly, "you stayed." And those two words landed heavier than anything else had so far, because they reframed everything, turned something small into something meaningful in a way Jamal had never considered. And the colonel continued, "Most people pass by, they do not stop, they do not return, but you did." And Jamal looked down for a second, not out of discomfort, but because he did not know where to place that kind of acknowledgement. And the colonel let the silence sit there, not filling it, not rushing past it, just allowing it to exist. And then he asked one more question, this one quieter, more specific, like the final piece he needed to move forward. "When she stood there that night, did she look afraid?" And Jamal thought about it carefully. not answering too fast, replaying that moment one more time. The way her shoulders had been set, the way her eyes had followed something only she could see, and he shook his head slowly, lifting his gaze back to meet the colonel's. "No, sir," he said, steady now, certain. She looked ready. The words stayed between them, quiet but undeniable, and the colonel did not respond right away, not because he disagreed, but because he understood it more than Jamal realized. And for a brief moment his posture shifted again, not in authority, but in memory, like something from years ago had just aligned with what this 17-year-old had seen in a single night. And the morning air moved gently through the street, carrying the faint scent of damp pavement and cut grass, grounding everything back into reality. And the colonel gave a small nod, almost imperceptible, as if confirming something to himself before speaking again. "That means she was not lost in that moment," he said, steady, measured. "She knew where she was going." And Jamal listened, the words settling into him differently, because until now he had only thought of her as someone surviving day to day, not someone choosing direction, and that realization changed the way he remembered her entirely. And behind them, one of the Marines finished speaking into the radio, his voice low and precise, and then stepped back into position. But the energy in the yard had shifted, no longer tense, no longer uncertain, now focused, like a path had just been drawn where before there had only been questions. And the colonel turned his attention fully back to Jamal, his voice softer now, not in volume, but in tone, carrying something closer to trust. "There is something else," he said, and Jamal straightened slightly without realizing it, because the way the man spoke made it feel like what came next mattered even more. Did she ever react to anything specific, a sound, a name, a place? And Jamal paused, thinking carefully, not rushing, because every detail now felt like it belonged to something larger than memory. And then it came back to him, subtle at first, then clear. "There was a truck," he said slowly, and the colonel's eyes sharpened just slightly, not alarmed, but attentive. "Not every night, just once," Jamal continued. "It drove past the station, slow, and she looked up right away. And he could see it now, the way her body had straightened, the way her grip on the chain had tightened just enough to notice." And the colonel did not interrupt, did not rush him, just listened. "It was a dark green truck," Jamal added. "Older model, kind of loud engine. You could hear it before you saw it." And there was a pause, not empty, but full, and the colonel's gaze shifted slightly to the side, like he was placing that detail somewhere specific, connecting it to something already known. And then he nodded once, slower this time, more deliberate, and when he spoke again, there was no doubt in his voice, only direction. "That is not random," he said, and Jamal felt it again, that shift, the moment where something small became something important. And the colonel continued. "She was recognizing something familiar." And Jamal looked down briefly, his fingers still resting against the edge of the photograph. And for the first time since all of this began, he felt something else beneath the confusion, beneath the weight of it all, something quieter but just as strong, a sense that what he had done mattered in a way he had never expected, not because it was big, but because it was consistent, because he had shown up when no one else did. And the colonel stepped back half a pace, not away, but into a position that allowed him to take everything in, the street, the house, the people watching, the story unfolding in real time. And then he looked at Jamal again, his voice calm, grounded, but carrying something that had not been there before, something like certainty. "We are close," he said, and for the first time, Jamal believed it too. The words did not rush anything forward, but they changed the way everyone stood, like the ground itself had shifted just enough to realign what mattered. And Jamal felt it in the way the Marines no longer looked like a wall, but like a direction, their presence no longer pressing down on the street, but pointing somewhere beyond it. And the colonel turned again, this time fully, his voice low but clear as he spoke to the Marine with the radio, giving a short instruction that carried weight, without volume. And the response came back almost instantly, coordinates, confirmation, movement already in place. And Jamal did not understand the exact words, but he understood the rhythm of it, the way everything was now moving with purpose instead of uncertainty. And for a moment he just stood there, watching something unfold that had started with him without ever asking him to lead it. And then the colonel stepped closer again, not in command, but in acknowledgement. "You said the truck came from that direction," he said, nodding toward the end of the street, and Jamal followed his gaze, seeing it differently now, not just as the road he walked every day, but as a line connected to something bigger. "Yes, sir," he replied, steady, and the colonel gave a small nod, as if that answer had already been expected, already placed into the plan forming behind his eyes, and then, for the first time, he gestured slightly, not sharply, but inviting. "Walk with me," he said, and the words carried no pressure, but Jamal felt the shift immediately, because this was no longer just about answering questions. This was about moving forward, and he stepped down from the porch fully, the wood creaking softly under his weight, his sneakers touching the gravel as he moved beside the colonel, and the Marines adjusted without breaking formation, creating a path without making it obvious, and the street seemed quieter now, even with people watching, even with phones still raised, because something about the moment had turned from spectacle into purpose. And as they walked slowly toward the edge of the yard, Jamal glanced once toward his mother, who gave him a small, uncertain nod, trusting him even without understanding, and he returned it, grounding himself before looking ahead again, and the colonel spoke once more, his voice lower now, meant only for Jamal. "When you helped her, you did not know who she was," he said, and Jamal shook his head. "No, sir," he answered, and the colonel continued. "That matters." And the way he said it made Jamal pause internally, because it meant something deeper than it sounded, and he did not explain it further. Not yet, just let it sit there, letting Jamal feel it instead of defining it. And they reached the edge of the street, the asphalt still slightly damp, reflecting a faint line of morning light, and the colonel stopped, looking down the road where Jamal had said she had been watching, and for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence stretching just long enough to feel intentional, like a breath before something important, and then, in the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the low rumble of an engine, deep, uneven, familiar in a way that made Jamal's chest tighten before his mind could catch up, and his eyes lifted automatically, locking onto the far end of the road where a dark shape had just begun to appear, moving slowly into view, and without needing to be told, Jamal knew exactly what it was. The sound grew louder, not aggressive, not fast, just steady, like it had somewhere specific to be and no reason to rush, and Jamal felt it in his chest before the truck fully came into view. That same uneven rumble he had heard nights ago behind the gas station. The same low vibration that had made her lift her head instantly, and now it was here, moving slowly down his street, past the houses that had never seen anything like this, past the neighbors who had stopped whispering altogether, their phones still raised but forgotten for a moment as something real replaced curiosity, and the dark green truck rolled forward, older model, paint worn but intact, sunlight catching along its edges in a dull reflection, and Jamal did not need to say anything because the colonel had already seen it, his posture shifting just slightly, not tense, not surprised, but certain, like a line had just been drawn from memory to reality. And the Marines adjusted again, not blocking, not surrounding, just positioning with quiet precision, creating space instead of pressure, and the truck slowed as it approached, the engine easing down into a softer idle, and for a second everything felt suspended, like the entire street was holding its breath without knowing why, and Jamal's fingers tightened slightly around the photograph still in his hand, the paper now warm, grounding him as his eyes stayed locked on the driver's side window, waiting, not out of fear, but out of recognition, and the colonel did not move forward yet, did not speak. He simply stood beside Jamal, present, steady, letting the moment arrive on its own terms. And then the truck came to a full stop just a few yards ahead, the engine continuing its low hum, a familiar sound now that seemed to echo the memory Jamal carried from those quiet nights. And the driver's door did not open right away, which somehow made everything feel even more deliberate, more intentional, and Jamal noticed something then, something small but clear, the way the colonel's hand relaxed slightly at his side, not completely, but enough to show that whatever this was, it was not unexpected, and then finally, slowly, the door opened with a soft mechanical creak, not loud, not dramatic, just real, and a figure stepped out, steady but careful, like someone measuring each step against the ground beneath them. And Jamal's breath caught again, Not because he was unsure, but because he knew. Even before he saw her face clearly, even before the light fully reached her, it was her. The same posture, the same quiet presence, but different now, cleaner, more grounded, like something that had been drifting had found its place again, and she stood there for a moment, looking ahead, not at the Marines, not at the neighbors, but directly at Jamal, her eyes steady, the same way they had been under that flickering gas station light, and everything else faded again. The uniforms, the street, the noise, until it was just that look, familiar and unchanged. And then, slowly, she lifted her hand. Not high, not dramatic, just enough, her fingers trembling slightly as she brought them up toward her chest, touching that same worn chain she had never let go of. And Jamal felt something shift inside him, something quiet but undeniable. Because in that moment, he understood, this had never been about being found, it had been about being ready to return. For a moment, no one moved. Not the Marines, not the neighbors, not even the wind brushing lightly through the street. And Jamal felt his heartbeat slow into something steady, something grounded, as if the world had quietly shifted from tension into understanding. And the colonel took one step forward, then stopped, not rushing, not closing the distance completely, just enough to be seen without overwhelming the moment. And his voice, when it came, was lower than before, not carrying command, but something far more personal. "Mom," he said, and the word did not echo, but it carried years inside it, years of searching, of waiting, of not knowing. And the woman stood there, her hand still resting against the chain at her chest, her eyes fixed on him, and for a second it felt like time was deciding whether to move forward or stay where it was. And then she took a step, slow but certain, her shoes pressing lightly against the pavement, and Jamal watched as the distance between them began to close, not dramatically, not quickly, but with a quiet purpose that made everything else feel unnecessary. And the Marines remained still, their presence now protective rather than imposing, their silence holding the space instead of filling it. And the colonel did not move again until she reached him, until the space between them was small enough to feel real. And then he lifted his hand slightly, not fully, not all at once, like he was giving the moment room to happen naturally. And she looked at him, really looked this time, her expression softening in a way Jamal had never seen before, not behind the gas station, not under that flickering light. And her voice, when it finally came, was quiet, almost fragile, but clear. "Richard," she said, and the name settled into the morning like something that had been waiting to be spoken again. And the colonel's shoulders shifted, just enough to show that he had heard it not as a title, not as a rank, but as a son, and he stepped forward the rest of the way, closing the distance. And though the movement was simple, it carried something deeper than anything else that had happened so far. And Jamal looked down for a moment, not out of discomfort, but because he understood that this part did not belong to him, that this was something being returned, something being restored in a way that did not need witnesses. And yet he remained where he was, because somehow he had become part of the path that led here. And after a few seconds, the colonel stepped back slightly, just enough to look at her again, to confirm what was already real. And then he turned his head just enough to glance toward Jamal, not breaking the moment, just acknowledging it. And there was something in that look that did not need to be explained, something like gratitude, something like recognition. And then the woman followed his gaze, her eyes finding Jamal again. And for the first time since she stepped out of the truck, she smiled, small, quiet, but unmistakable. And Jamal felt it immediately, that same recognition from before, the same unspoken understanding. But now it carried something more, something complete. And she lifted her hand again, just slightly, not a wave, not a gesture meant for anyone else, but something simple, something meant only for him. And in that moment, Jamal realized that what he had given her had never been just food. It had been time, presence, and something even quieter than that, something that had stayed with her long enough to bring her all the way back here. The smile did not fade quickly. It lingered just long enough to feel real, like something she had not allowed herself in a very long time. And Jamal stood there, unsure whether to move or stay still, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, the photograph now forgotten but still held, as if letting go of it might break the moment. And the colonel turned fully toward him this time, not stepping away from his mother, but not standing between them either. His presence balanced in a way that made space for both, past and present, to exist at once. And when he spoke, his voice carried something different now, something less guarded, more human. "Jamal," he said, using his name for the first time, and that alone made the moment shift again, because it was no longer about a witness, it was about a person. And Jamal looked up, meeting his eyes, steady, listening, and the colonel continued, "There are things I need to say, but I am not going to rush them." And that sentence alone carried a weight of discipline, of control, but also of respect. And he took a small breath before continuing. "You found her when we could not, but more than that, you reached her when no one else did." And Jamal shook his head slightly, almost instinctively, because it still felt too big, too much. "I did not find her," he said quietly. "She was already there." And the colonel listened, not interrupting, not correcting, just letting the words settle, and then he gave a small nod, accepting the truth in them, without needing to reshape it. "Maybe," he replied, "but you stayed long enough for her to come back to herself." And those words landed differently, deeper, because they explained something Jamal had felt but never named. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence not empty but full, like a space where meaning could exist without being forced. And behind them, the Marines remained still, their formation unchanged, but their presence softer now, no longer defining the scene, just supporting it. And the colonel glanced briefly toward his mother, who was still watching Jamal with that same quiet recognition. And then he looked back, his voice steady again, but carrying something unmistakable beneath it. "I owe you more than I can put into words," he said. And Jamal shifted slightly, uncomfortable, not because of the gratitude, but because he did not know where to place it, did not know how to respond to something that felt larger than anything he had done. And he shook his head again, slower this time, more certain. "You do not owe me anything, sir," he said. And the colonel's expression softened just enough to show that he understood the intention, even if he did not agree with it. And he did not argue, did not insist, just let the statement exist as it was. And then he stepped slightly to the side, just enough to change the angle of the moment, allowing his mother to take one small step forward toward Jamal. And she did, carefully, her movements still measured but no longer uncertain. And when she stopped in front of him, her eyes held his again, steady, present, and her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear. "You saw me," she said. And Jamal felt that more than he heard it, because it was not just a statement. It was a truth, simple and complete. And for a second he did not respond, not because he could not, but because he understood exactly what she meant. And when he finally spoke, his voice was just as quiet, just as steady. "Yes, ma'am." And that was enough. The words settled into the space between them, quiet and complete. And for a moment nothing else needed to be said, because what she had spoken was not just acknowledgement, it was recognition of something deeper, something most people passed by without ever noticing. And Jamal felt it in the way her eyes did not drift, did not avoid, but stayed present, steady, like she was no longer slipping between places but fully here. And he stood there, not shifting, not looking away, because somehow he understood that this moment required nothing more than being exactly where he was. And behind her, the colonel watched, not interrupting, not stepping forward, allowing something personal to unfold without turning it into something formal. And the Marines remained still, their presence now almost invisible, as if they understood that this was no longer about orders or missions, but about something human that could not be commanded. And the morning light had shifted slightly, warmer now, catching along the edges of the truck, the pavement, the small details that had been overlooked before, grounding everything in a quiet clarity. And the woman lowered her hand slowly from the chain at her chest, her fingers relaxing as if they no longer needed to hold on so tightly. And she took a small breath, steady, controlled, like someone returning to a rhythm she had once known. And then she spoke again, softer this time, but just as clear. "You did not ask me who I was," she said. And Jamal shook his head gently. "No, ma'am," he replied. And she gave the smallest nod, not in approval, but in understanding. "That is why I could stay," she continued. And those words carried a meaning that went beyond explanation, because they revealed something simple and rare, that sometimes it was not the questions that helped someone return, but the absence of them. The space to exist without needing to explain, and Jamal felt that settle into him. Not as something to analyze, but something to remember. And the colonel stepped forward then, just enough to stand beside her again. Not taking over the moment, but joining it, his voice calm, steady. "We are taking her home," he said, not as an announcement, but as a fact that had already become real, and Jamal nodded slowly. The word home carrying more weight now than it ever had before, because he had seen what it looked like when someone had been without it, and the colonel turned slightly toward him again, his expression composed but no longer distant. "If you are willing," he added, "we would like you to come visit when she is ready." And the offer was simple, but it carried something deeper, an extension not of obligation, but of connection, and Jamal hesitated for just a second, not out of doubt, but because he understood that this was not something casual, it was something that mattered, and he nodded. "Yes, sir," he said, steady, and the woman looked at him again, that same quiet smile returning, not wide, not exaggerated, just enough to show that something inside her had settled into place. And then, slowly, she turned toward the truck, not hesitating, not looking back immediately, because this time, she was not leaving something behind. She was returning to something that had been waiting, and Jamal watched as she reached the door, pausing for just a moment before placing her hand on it, her posture calm, grounded, and then she glanced back once more, her eyes finding his again, and in that brief look, there was no confusion, no distance, just a quiet certainty that needed no explanation, and Jamal understood it completely, because for the first time, he saw not just who she had been, but who she had become again. The truck door closed with a soft, final sound that did not echo but lingered, like a quiet period at the end of something long and unfinished, and Jamal stood there as the engine shifted back into a low, steady hum. The same sound that had once meant nothing more than a passing vehicle, but now carried something entirely different, something complete, and the colonel remained beside the truck for a moment longer, his hand resting lightly against the frame, not holding on, just present, and then he stepped back, giving a short nod toward the Marines, not sharp, not urgent, just enough to signal that what needed to happen had already happened, and the formation began to ease, not breaking, but softening, their presence no longer defining the street but releasing it, and the neighbors slowly lowered their phones, their expressions no longer filled with curiosity but something quieter, something closer to understanding, even if they could not fully explain it, and Jamal exhaled without realizing he had been holding his breath, his shoulders settling as the moment began to move forward again, not rushed, not forced, just continuing, and the colonel turned to him one last time, his expression composed but carrying something unmistakable beneath it, something that did not need words, and he gave a single nod, not formal, not distant, but personal, and Jamal returned it instinctively, because some gestures did not need to be taught, they were simply understood, and then the truck began to roll forward, slow at first, tires moving across the pavement with a quiet certainty, and Jamal watched as it passed, the sunlight catching briefly along the window, and for just a second, he saw her again inside, her hand resting calmly in her lap, the chain no longer held tightly, but simply there, part of her, not something she needed to cling to anymore, and their eyes met one last time, not long, not dramatic, just enough, and she gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible, but clear, and then the truck moved on, down the street, past the place where she had once stood waiting, past the line of sight that had held her for so long, and into something new, something forward, and the sound of the engine faded gradually, not disappearing all at once, but easing into the distance until it became part of the background again, like it had always been there, and Jamal remained where he was, not moving immediately, because some moments did not end when they were over, they stayed, settling quietly into the spaces inside you that did not need to be explained, and the street slowly returned to itself, the faint sounds of everyday life rising again, a car door closing somewhere, a voice calling from across the block, the normal rhythm of a place that had just held something extraordinary without ever needing to announce it. And Jamal looked down at his hands, at the photograph still resting between his fingers, and for the first time, he smiled, not wide, not outward, but quiet, steady, because he understood something now that he had not before, that what he had done had never been about changing anything big. It had been about showing up, about staying when it was easier to walk away. And he slipped the photograph gently into his pocket, not as something to keep, but as something to remember. And then he turned back toward his house, the morning light warm against his skin, his steps unhurried, grounded, and as he reached the porch, he paused for just a second, glancing down the street, where the truck had disappeared, and in that quiet, ordinary moment, everything felt different, not louder, not brighter, just clearer, like the world had not changed at all, but he had learned how to see it.